we come to now is what I think most people would consider the forgotten Rocky movie. This is the one that honestly has just faded from most people's memory. Even at the time that it was released, this is the one that I remember the clearest from when it was actually out. The other, several of them were out before I was born, and the ones that were out, when I was a kid, I took very little notice of. But I remember like the trailers for this one, and I remember hearing just kind of chatter, in my periphery there, because I wasn't, I was a little kid. This didn't affect me. But the general response that I recall was, another Rocky movie. That was kind of where the general public were. As we mentioned in the last video, that shadow of Rocky 4 was proving to be very difficult to escape. A lot of people, though, again, Rocky 4 being incredibly enjoyable and a lot of fun and earnest. I didn't really bring that up in the review of Rocky 4, but I feel I should say that right now. For whatever else you can say about it, it was an earnest, honest film, just like all of the Rocky movies. But I think due in large part to just the aesthetic choices, the story choices, and whatnot made in that film, Rocky had stopped being an inspirational, underdog story and had become something of a joke. Now, what you got to remember, again, this is something that it's hard for people, born kind of in the 90s going forward to really get, is, again, this is back in the day when multiple sequels was not the norm. It was starting to become the norm. You had this, you had the Star Trek franchise, you had Jaws, you had the various Nightmare on Elm Streets, Halloweens, and Friday the 13th sequels that were very big at the time. But the general the general perception was that the further and further these films went into their series, the more and more camp and the more and more lazy they became. Now, as we discussed with the Star Trek series, that's not true of them, and I don't think it's true of the Rocky series. But it was the general perception. People felt, especially with Rocky 4, that Rocky had become a joke. And I feel that backlash, I can only imagine what that film would have been like had it come out in the days of the internet. I can only imagine. It would have been the X-Men Origins Wolverine of its day. But be that as it may, for whatever reason, I think the studio kind of felt like they had gone as far as they had gone. I think Sly Stallone probably felt the story had gone as far as it was gone, and it was time to, as far as they were concerned, to end the Rocky series. And so with Rocky 5, that is what they set out to do. But again, this film just kind of, passed by and nobody really took notice of it, and as such, it's kind of faded into a little bit of obscurity. It's almost a forgotten gem review. The joke, I remember for a long time, was people saying, okay, what was the plot of Rocky 5? And people kind of going, and couldn't quite do it. So the question that we have to answer when looking at it and its place in the series is, does it deserve to be forgotten? We kind of know the reasons why it was kind of forgotten, but does it really deserve that distinction? I think that's what we need to discuss. So for those who don't know, like I said, the running joke for a long time was, can anyone even tell you the story? So this one picks up directly after Rocky 4. Rocky coming back from Russia after having had the shit kicked out of him. He's starting to suffer from, all the injuries that he's accumulated over the years and especially the injuries he accumulated in the fight with Drago are now taking its toll. His hands are shaking. You know, he's suffering from brain damage, essentially. And because of that, he kind of makes the decision, or has the decision made for him, that he's got to retire. You know, he has to give it up. This comes at the worst possible time because, as always, Paul Lee, who knows why Rocky keeps this guy around? That is pure Italian right there. If you got a friend and he's your friend, you keep them around. I've never had a friend as destructive as Paul Lee, but I've known people who have, and it is that loyalty thing. But anyway, through the genius of Paul Lee, he somehow gave the power of attorney for them over to their accountant, and their accountant stole a bunch of their money. So basically, Rocky and his family are broke. And so he and Adrienne and their son have to move back to the old neighborhood. So you already see what's going on here. With this being the last Rocky film, as far as they were aware at the time, I think the general concept was, we need to bring Rocky back down to basics. This is kind of like, if you watch the Bond series, which we'll discuss later, after they did Spy Who Loved Me, and after they did Moonraker, they decided, okay, we've gone really crazy. We need to bring Bond back down to basics, and kind of tone down the silliness a little bit, and that's where you get For Your Eyes Only. And I think that's what they were trying to do here, and trying to bring the story full circle. So the only thing they have left to them is Mickey's gym, which he left to Rocky's son. So Rocky starts running the gym, and there he meets a young fighter named Tommy Gunn, really. And through what's-its and circumstances, Rocky tries to train him up to be a fighter. I should also mention that through all of this, there is a Don King gentleman, and I don't even remember the character's name. I'm just going to call him Don King, because that's essentially what he is. I mean, it could not be clearer who he was meant to be emulating if they hung a sign around his neck that said Don King. But this Don King gentleman is constantly trying to get Rocky back in the ring, and constantly trying to egg him on and all this. So he's kind of our main antagonist for the story. So a lot going on here. So let's talk about some of this. Let's talk about the positives. Well, first off, I think it's a smart thing to go back to basics and do the back to basics approach to the story and to the characters. Again, I love Rocky 3 and Rocky 4, but they really did get very far from the gritty, realism of the original. I think they felt this as well, both the studio and Sly Stallone, because the original director is back to kind of bookend the series. And you can definitely tell the difference between his eye and Stallone's eye directorially, because there's less of a sheen on everything. There's less of a shine on it all. It's got that early 90s, late 80s gritty look, kind of the Die Hard look almost. Still hyper realism, but still with that little bit of gritty gloss is, I guess, the best way to put it. I think that's a good thing. I think it's good if you're going to end the series, let's end it on a good note, or on a bookending note visually. I also think that one of the things I really like about the Rocky series is that Sylvester Stallone, he doesn't get credit. I think we can agree, if we haven't agreed on this yet, I think we can agree. Sylvester Stallone does not get nearly enough credit for just how brilliant a creative mind he is. And maybe it's just with the one thing, but he really, not only as a director is he very good, but as a storyteller and a writer, moving his characters forward in time and having them keep in with the times is one of his strong suits. One of the things I like about this movie is it starts to deal with kind of the ugly side of boxing. Not just, the injuries, I'll get to that in a second, but the corruption, the fixing, and whatnot, things that were becoming more prominent in the news. Now, boxing has, as far as I know, has always been a bit dirty. There's always been people paying people to take falls and take dives. I mean, hell, go watch any crime show from about the 50s on. There's always at least one episode of it where there's some boxer who's being paid to take a dive. Hell, it was one of the major plots of On the Waterfront. So boxing has always been a dirty business, but especially the late 80s, early 90s with Don King, it was really starting to come out just what all was going on. One of the jokes I remember hearing was, is pro wrestling fake? No. How fake can it be if Don King's not making any money off of it? So, bringing in this Don King character and starting to show the corruption of boxing, the cheating, paper champions, these whole concepts is something new for the Rocky series. The Rocky series has always presented boxing as, kind of a noble pursuit. But here it is diving into, no, it's ugly, it's corrupt and whatnot. That being said, I think the Don King characterization is a little too on the nose. Like I said, you might as well just hang a sign on the fucking guy's neck. I think the character is a little too close. I think you could have done it, but pulled him back a little bit. Now that's going to be in contrast to something else I'm going to say. I also like that this film does delve into, they touched on this a bit in Rocky 2, and I talked about it a bit in the Rocky 2 review, and that rhymes, is the all too common occurrence of professional athletes trusting the wrong people with their money and losing it all. So you go from having a big mansion and a fairly extravagant lifestyle to, having nothing because you trusted the wrong people or you didn't know enough about what was going on or who was handling your money. You hear about this all the time on ESPN or HBO. It's the kind of thing Brian Gumble loves to cover. So I think showing that element of it and that element of the sport's life is, again, very honest, which is something that you can always say the Rocky films have always been. They've been very honest. And I like what that forces Rocky to do as a character in his arc in this story. One of the early scenes is him talking to his son, now played by his actual son, Sage Stallone, which we'll talk about that little issue in a second, is him talking to his son and saying, I was really happy. Oh, Drew and Dudley fell over. They always do. Anyway, they're necking in the back. Anyway, is him sitting with his son and saying, I didn't have all of this. I didn't have all these advantages, and I'm glad I can give that to you. That's the goal of a father, is to give his children better lives than he had, and all this. And then he's right back to the same place he started, and his son now has to make that adjustment. I think it's a great arc for him, and it really does. Again, Rocky has always steered away from the concept of toxic masculinity, but here you can definitely see that feeling of what it means to be an adult and what it means to be a father and a man. But you can associate with any parent that you're supposed to do better for your kid, and when you feel like you failed at that, what that does to you psychologically and how you'll grab on to any threat. I think for his part, at the time, young Sage Stallone did a very good job. I thought it was a very good performance, honestly. I definitely think in terms of kids in Hollywood and, kids in movies, I thought he was one of the better ones. Well-written character and a fairly well-performed character. Someone who's dealing with the difficulty of a major life shakeup, dealing with the difficulty of growing up, hitting that preteen, early teen age range where you start to kind of have resentment, and I think he played a wide range of emotions. I thought he did an excellent job. The only thing I will say, and this is again the problem when you're watching these films back to back to back to back instead of like the 3 years in between each one, is that it's very jarring when this movie is supposed to take place directly after Rocky IV. He gets off the plane to see his kid, and his kid has now grown, has aged at least 3 or 4 years, and now looks completely different than he did when he left. It's like, how long were you in Russia, dude? Are we supposed to think that he blacked out during all of this? But anyway, that's a minor continuity error, but a lot of movies and whatnot did that back. I also think this is, again, a great showing for Adrienne, giving her, this is the last film for Adrienne. This is her final appearance in a Rocky movie. And again, they didn't know that at the time. Well, I guess they did know that at the time. I thought this was the last one for all of them. But this is her final appearance. And I think she has a great moment with Rocky in the street, and he's just screaming, he's having a breakdown, she's kind of yelling back at him, that you've got me, you've got your son, we don't need anything else. She ends up retaking her job that she had in the first one in the pet store, and Rocky doesn't want her to. He says, why are you working there? You can be, and she's like, because I want to be close to you. I think one thing we've discovered, and one thing I think we can agree on, is Adrienne is one of the most maligned characters in popular culture. I think she deserves better than this reputation as the "you're never gonna win, Rock" kind of character. I think she has way more to offer than just that. And I think this was a good final outing for her. Again, we didn't know that was going to be the case, but here it is. So all in all, I think there's a lot of positive things going on in this movie. I think if if they wanted to end the series, this is, I think, how it should go out. Going back to basics, getting a little grittier, stripping away all of the, metaphorically and literally stripping away all of the glitz and glamour and getting him back to the grittier roots that he started with. So where does this film fall down? Well, I don't think there's any one thing. Again, it's not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. I think the problem with it is it's just tired. And I think the best metaphor of this, and I know some people disagree with me, and that's fine, I think is in its major opponent / antagonist, Tommy Gunn. Now, I don't blame the movie on him. That's not what I'm saying. But the character is kind of an amalgam of what's kind of gone wrong with the film. So Tommy Gunn is Rocky's protege turned adversary. Rocky trains him up, and then he's seduced by the money and the power, and he's an angry young man and just wants to fight, and takes everything Rocky taught him and goes bad with it, and all this. They end up having instead of a big boxing match, they have a fight in the alley, and Rocky beats the shit out of him. I liked the story of Rocky kind of training a new fighter. And I liked the concept of a battle for this fighter's soul between the angel Rocky and the devil Don King. The problem being, for me, is that Tommy Gunn is he's just not that interesting. All the parts are there. All the pieces are there. He's got an interesting backstory that he started to fight because his dad was a drunk and, beat him up. And then, he said the first fight I ever had was when I beat up my father. So he's this kid with a lot of anger. who could go either way. Like I say, all the pieces are there for a really compelling character. And I think for his part, the actor playing him, and I forget his name, was a professional boxer, which starts the new trend in Rocky films of opponents being played by actual boxers. And I think for someone who's not trained as an actor, I think he does a fairly good job. The problem is that there is just no charisma in Tommy Gunn. He is just the blandest antagonist, opponent, whatever you want to call it, that we've had in a Rocky film. And again, all the parts are there. It's a decent performance. The script is there. The characterizations are there. You know what they're going for. But the character just feels like, and I've used this metaphor before, like a piece of bubble gum that you've chewed, all the flavor has gone out, and now you're just mixing this goop around in your mouth. That sounds dirtier than I wanted it to. Because the one thing you can always say is that Rocky films had charismatic opponents. I mean, even going back to the grittiness of the first one, Apollo Creed. I mean, you're not going to match Carl Weathers with this kid. But this Shawn Michaels looking motherfucker just, I don't know. And again, I don't blame the actor. I don't blame the actor. I don't blame the script. What I blame is franchise fatigue. And I think we all know what I'm talking about. There comes a point in any long-running franchise where you can just feel that the creative minds behind it, the studio behind it, hell, even the audience are just getting tired. They may love the movies, they love the characters, but you start just going, are we doing this again? Again, that was the big response when this film came out. And I think that's kind of, again, Tommy Gunn is kind of the antithesis of this, but I think it's something that runs through the whole film. By the time you get done watching these, and even if you're taking breaks in between them like I was doing, by the time you hit number 5, you can just feel that there is a malaise. I think people they're not sleepwalking, they're still giving it everything they've got, but much like Rocky in Rocky 3, the passion, the eye of the tiger, that drive is just kind of gone. Or not gone, but it just died down. The flame is now a flicker. And the question then becomes, I don't know how to complete that thought. Sorry. But I think when that happens, all they can try to do is try to, make the best film they can, end the series on the most positive note that they're capable of, and let it go. And that's what they did. And for a very long time, that was the end of Rocky. That was his last hoorah, And I think for a long time, people were satisfied with that. But as we are going to come to understand is that Sylvester Stallone was not satisfied with that. And as years kind of went by, other projects, other things, I think everybody felt like this wasn't how we wanted Rocky to go out. And as they say, every great fighter has one more great fight in him. And as we would find out almost 20 years later, Rocky indeed had one more great fight in him. And that would be what we will talk about next time with Rocky Balboa. So, until next time, yo Adrienne, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.